Hello, everybody. As we gather, I posted a link to the agenda. Please sign in if you have any new items to talk about today.
Hey, everybody.
Hello. We'll get started in just a few more minutes. See if Mr. Wheeler joins us. He's had some feels on the mailing list. We'll give it one more minute for folks to gather. All right, the clock on the wall says 3 after the hour. Let us get started. We are here today to talk about the document currently proposed as the Source Code Management Best Practices Guide. Do we have anyone that's interested in helping us take notes for the meeting today? Thank you, Dan. Appreciate that. As folks have opens, please put those into the opens sections. My first item of business is I am going to be a semi-regular attendee on this call. So I need to have one of the folks that's a contributor or collaborator of the larger working group, if they could assist in kind of co-leading this group, helping herd the cats on the call, so to speak, being mini Crow. So do we have anyone interested in potentially taking on that role to help us with our forward momentum? I'll put a note out to the larger working group, but just wanted to ask here. No?
Yeah. Am I eligible for this?
You are not.
I'm not.
I need to have someone that's been a longtime contributor for the group. Now, you'll definitely be actively engaged and you can provide as much energy as you want, but I need to have kind of someone just to keep an eye on things if I'm not around, someone that's familiar with the foundation and the group. Dan?
I don't know if I'm eligible, but I would be happy to do it. The only problem is that I have a standing conflict at 1:30 on Wednesdays. So I was going to say I need to actually leave the call halfway through. It's not ideal. So yes, and only if yes, and if we can change the call time, then which I know is always a pain, and I am really sorry to have to kind of bring it up. The worst possible thing in the world, but yes, I would be happy to co-chair or to run the meetings or however you want. Yeah, that would be, yeah, I would love that actually. But because yes. But yeah, we need to find a different time.
Yeah, and the time is dependent upon the people that show up and want to do the work. While we
Yeah.
had many people that suggested they would like to participate, we have not had, that has not happened. This
Materialized.
group has consistently been showing up. So, as if you can get the handful of us here in this little group to agree on a different time, that's a-okay with me. I can get Khalil to adjust the meeting invite.
How do you, I mean, I'm just looking at my schedule. How do you all feel about Fridays about an hour earlier than now? So that would be 2 p.m. UK time.
Fridays are a big problem for me. In Israel, we don't do Fridays.
Okay, yeah, that's totally fine. Obviously.
And we do need Noam. So while he's not eligible to be the leader, we need him since he's the primary contributor here. So
the other option, another option I'm going to put on the table immediately is, and we can always do this over whatever, a polling system if that is necessary, but maybe we can come to an arrangement here. This same time slot, but tomorrow, Thursdays. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm cool with it.
If people are happy with that, Probe, do you think you could ask the powers that be to change the time slot on the calendar? And then I would be more than happy to.
Unfortunately, they've given me more access than they should have. I have a little bit more control.
You can actually change
Except-
it. You are the
Well, I
power.
can't. Google's the one thing I don't have full permission to. Sorry, Ido. Oh, okay. But I don't have elevated permissions with Google, so I had to ask the folks. But like Zoom, I have a little bit more influence on. All right,
Okay,
so
yes,
and Christine also volunteers to help out. 2 co-chairs.
I can help out. I can do this time. I can do the new time, Dan, that you suggested. So
if we can change it to the new time, and then we can always arrange, we can, swap in and out as necessary. It's just that Wednesdays at this time is just never a good time for me, unfortunately. But yeah, that would be great.
All right, so our next call will be Thursday at what is this, 10 a.m. Eastern, which is 1500 London. So we will I'll get that adjusted for our next call. I'll note that Christine and Dan will be our co-leads and help us continue our velocity as we start to collaborate on the guide.
Okay, sounds good. Just the 23rd might be a day that is the only one instance that I might not be able to make it, I think. But that's okay.
Awesome. I appreciate you too. And we will adjust the meeting time. All right, so I believe I merged the PR that Noam had put forth. So we should actually have some actual proper content to take a look at. Let's see, here we go. I'll put a link in the chat and then I'll put it in the notes. But here is the content we are starting to work with. Where would we like to begin?
I guess we could talk about working mode, how we expect to work on this content.
Sounds
Should
good.
we do it in PRs? Should we be, how do people feel we should be working on the content?
But to give everybody context, generally when we've worked on groups I've been involved with have worked on guides, is we have typically put things into a Google document, though that appears to be a little easier for like when there's heavy changes potentially. And then ultimately things get put into GitHub and then things are managed with PRs and issues. Whatever style the group is comfortable with, if we just want to manage because it already is in GitHub through PRs and issues, that is perfectly acceptable. But I agree, Dan, let's agree on how we want to conduct our work here on the guide. Thoughts and suggestions?
Is there any impact on starting on a Google Doc? I'm sorry, I missed a few meetings and I'm not sure where we're at now.
This is only our second one, so you only missed
Oh.
one. So you're not that far behind.
Okay, good.
Well,
Yeah, I mean, I think the Google Doc works well. Yeah, if there's no impact in starting one.
just, but just one point, sorry, I think the content is in YAML format, right? Or is, so
Yes.
what's the source of truth content?
We have both YAML and Markdown.
Right, but the markdown is generated from the YAML, right?
Yeah, but it might be easier to edit the Markdown.
Okay. And those are in, those are in currently in a bunch of subdirectories, right? Okay. Given that it's all chopped up into different files in different subdirectories, I think it might be a lot easier to do this using PRs and issues, but that's just my view.
Mhm.
I see Christine's hands up.
Oh, yeah, this initial content norm, this is from like the Legitify, this matches what's in the legitify.dev.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Actually, it's we got a contribution yesterday that just modifies a little bit the wording to be it changed it from being like what is the problem to be what is the advice. So instead of saying for example, instead of saying a collaborator found a stale collaborator, the policy now is a collaborator should have activity in the last 3 months. And I think it's a good idea to decide what kind, or in this group, what kind of wording we want to use, and maybe you have experience from other documents so that you can take as inspiration.
Okay. Yeah, and I remember from kind of just like trying to flow through and navigate the legitify.dev doc, you have to kind of go back and forth a little bit. And so I don't know if it might still be easier to talk about some things high level on a Google Doc before we go into the YAML. Because the YAML might be, even though I guess the output, it might end up being a YAML. Sometimes it was a bit, I'm not sure. There was like some things that made sense to do a little bit more high level.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that, and I also, well, whether or not it's Google Doc or in Markdown, I kind of feel like it would be easier to edit as a document if it was in one document rather than a bunch of different markdown documents, which I would be happy to take a crack at kind of assembling it into one document. But then that kind of breaks the tool chain of regenerating it from the YAML, because then at that point we're in one document. And so is that okay? What do people think?
It could be okay, like because if I look at it, the YAML is grouped into GitHub and GitLab, and then under that there's all these different groups related to types of policies and all, and then it just talks about like the description and all. But is there like agreement on sort of like even just taking a step back and thinking about how the groupings are done and all of those different pieces, and is it easier to do that outside of the YAML file? That's kind of like where I'm getting at, where sometimes it's hard to see things maybe inside of a YAML file. Just to kind of give you an example, I took Legitify as inspiration and created a different document internally for how we wanted to manage our GitHub documents, and there was like some best practices related to other pieces of it. But then at the end, I took some of the pieces that came out of Legitify in terms of like the step-by-step directions, but put that on in the appendix. But there was like a lot of preamble that basically talked about more like the why behind some of those things in greater detail.
Yeah, that's exactly what I think we need here. I mean, that, you know, from a perspective of a document that people can go in and start reading, right? And the other thing that I think we talked about early on, which is the idea that we would have, as opposed to splitting it up into GitHub and GitLab, we would split it up into topics and say, like, for instance, two-factor authentication is important because XYZ, right? And then here's how you do it in GitHub. Here's how you do it in GitHub. I don't know. Do people feel that's more? What? If we all feel that is the way that we want the document to read, then we really do need to pull it all out into one document, I think. Crow. Sorry.
As a reader of the document, I would prefer to have the topics listed. As an implementer, if I'm going to apply this to my repo, I like how it's organized now. But I think for the purpose, our first purpose, I would suggest we combine it by topic and then say, here's how to execute in Hub and Lab and whatever other forges. Just my suggestion.
Yeah, I agree with that, because even when I was thinking through it, I did do it by topic, and then in the end I said, if you're interested in implementing it, go here. And then implementation was very much similar to what this the structure and the YAML file. But yeah, I like tell me why and then show me how later.
So, Christina, I don't suppose that document that you wrote internally based on the Legitify stuff would be something that you could turn into something that could be, because I could go and do this work, but if you've already done it, then it feels like duplication. But
yeah, I could definitely kind of try to look, because it's also very specific in some areas to F5, meaning like, okay, this is what we need to do. But there could be some parts that are pretty much generic and that could be used as a starter.
right.
I can bring that to the next meeting, a cleaned up version.
So what I'm happy to take an action to come up with a markdown which brings all these pieces together in one markdown file as a kind of straw man and rearranges things according to topic in advance of next week's call. Does that sound reasonable? Okay. Yeah, I can, yeah, because I can, I'll fire up my VS Code.
Can you clarify what do you mean by topics?
Sorry.
So can we clarify what do we mean about topics? Like topic is a repository or topic is GitHub?
Topic is like,
Topic is like managing roles and access. You kind of have it internally deep down under, say, GitHub and GitLab. Another topic could be just around something related to like two-factor authentication and securing access. Another topic could be teams, how they kind of like organizing the repository and the teams could be a topic.
yeah, like underneath project, for instance, there's a bunch of things like repository allows, what is this? Committer approvals policy. Like it feels like there's a
Another topic could be security alerts or scanning, things of that nature.
Yeah. So for example, you talk about organization has too many admins. So you could generify that and talk about managing administrative access. That could be the topic. And then you might
Right.
have several points that address that, like you should implement multi-factor authentication for your admins and this and this and this. And then, you know, as you have those things, we can tie those into the specific actions that would be taken in the repository, but just try to up level a little bit to talk about more broadly at a topic level.
yeah.
Gotcha. I think maybe a good first step could be to like compile the list of policies we want to describe and then like cluster them in topics and go from them and decide what will go in and what won't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Something that was also useful in terms of like a show me how, that there were some topics around when you are doing a certain thing. Like, for example, when you are setting up the organization the very first time, that could also be like a topic in terms of like what you do for best practices. And there was also a topic around when you're setting up a repository the very first time, these are the things that we recommend you do. And then there was some like ongoing things. And then the other thing that I also found that could have been a topic that was sort of outside of this, when we were trying to implement one of the best practices around how turning on branch protection and all these things, we kind of hit this wall with a small team, but they were too small to kind of like have all of these rules. So there was like all of these like gotchas that we kind of learned along the way that were, it was a bit nice to kind of know, okay, these are things you need to be mindful of when you turn on these settings. But anyway, those are other topics around like the show me how to do this if I'm doing it for the very first time, or show me how to do this if I kind of run into all these different issues, troubleshooting, things like that.
Yeah. So maybe we can try to put some labels on each policy, and then if it's like automatic process, we could arrange the final document in several different ways, which we find the most understood. So we can like label a policy for first time repo, access, etc. And then we can try to create different kind of arrangements.
Mhm.
But I think, however, it we do it, we should be, is it possible to get the generator that you've been using to generate it as one big markdown rather than a whole bunch of, yeah, because that would be a better place to start. Then we can start moving things around and I guess, are you suggesting that you would add like a field into like a labels field into the YAML description for each best practice as well, or?
Yeah, we can start by putting this info in the YAML, but if this document will evolve faster than the tool or just diverge, we might need to think about putting this info in the markdown as well. Maybe we can decide on the format of the markdown so I can create it for the next meeting.
Okay, yeah.
And another thing that is interesting in terms of audience is depending on who is actually implementing it. For example, in our case, we're open source program office, so we may not want to give all of the developers and all access to everything. So the audience might dictate some of the things you may turn on and off. For example, in our case, we said, okay, folks within this certain group are able to have these extra level permissions, but if you are a developer or a repo maintainer, you may have limited access. And so there's like all of these things around like coming at it from a different kinds of audiences, what may or may not, some of the settings that you may or may not want to turn on or off. So that is, that's a little twist in terms of like thinking through who the audience types are might actually give you some additional settings or topics you want to think about. As an example, we organized a lot of things in terms of teams. So maintainers had certain team access, but they may not have organizational owner access. And so that then limits some of the things that the project maintainers can do, but it made things a little tricky. But there's probably a different topic around from an audience point of view.
I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to drop. And I apologize because it's my bad timing this week, but please, I'll circle back on the Slack for whatever decision you've made about the markdown, and I'll work on whatever you need me to work on for next week. Okay.
Awesome. Thank you, Dan. And I sent a note over to operations. We'll get the meeting time changed for next time.
Awesome.
So hopefully we'll be able to get everybody's time. But yeah.
Great.
And
All right. Thank you.
mailing lists, Slack, great ways to share and talk.
Right. Oh, yeah. Okay. Cheers. Bye.
Bye.
I'm just thinking about the tags that we said that should align. So maybe maybe one of the first things we can do is to check how the GitLab and the GitHub sub-repositories can align like in a generic way between themselves. And that is a first step to making that kind of generic markdown that references to the specific samples of GitHub or GitLab, right? Because just looking, GitLab has a group, right? Well, GitHub has organizations, so I'm guessing it's almost the same concept. Same goes, I guess, for project and repository. No, project, I guess, is a number of repositories, but you get my point. So maybe that's the first step to getting those tags
I can create a table for next meeting that shows like each policy and for which SCM it applies.
Yeah, cool.
I think that mainly there are like much similarities, but in specific areas there are big difference, like in the GitHub Actions and GitLab pipelines and GitHub code spaces, different area. There is no equivalent, and we need to solve this issue when time comes. Do you want to talk about the point I raised before about the wording of the policies? Maybe. So we just got a contribution that changed the phrasing from being the violation, for example, stale admin found, to the recommendation, like admin should be active in the last 3 months, which is easier to act with this kind of policies, because you know what is the problem exactly, and you don't need to go to the documentation and see what is the recommendation for the violation. So I think we should decide on what is the phrasing we are going to use in general.
And how did you state the change, Noam, so I can get it down for the notes? It is the current layout focused on the policy and not the problem solution, and you want to flip that? Can you just restate that for me so I can note it?
Yeah, so currently it's the policy, it's the violation, and we need to flip the phrasing to be the recommendation. In general, we are going in the near future add like a unique ID for each policy, so we could modify the title internally without breaking the intention. But I'm not sure if it's mandatory in the documents.
I think having the unique IDs will be helpful when we have the generic category and say, hey, multi-factor, and for GitHub, it's policy ID 2, and for GitLab, it's policy ID 37. So I think that'll be easier to actually, for the implementation. Christine, please.
Oh, maybe I misunderstood. When you were saying that you are changing something from a violation to a recommendation, is that essentially what you were saying?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Another thing that I don't know if you want to do it or not, that was actually pretty helpful for some of the like recommendations or whatever it was. It was interesting sometimes when I was trying to figure out how important it was, because you had like medium, high, and when I was at a stalemate, I actually went out to the internet and looked for like some examples of if I were to turn on or off those things, what would happen. And it was good to kind of see examples of what could go wrong to help me make a decision on whether or not I wanted to turn something on or off. So all this to say, potentially some examples of what not doing something can lead to was an interesting. This would be interesting to kind of like add on to either the topics or add on to the individual pieces.
I agree. we have some example for threats in the documentation. Not for all policies, but for a lot of them. I think to explain the threat, we need to understand the attack surface. And so if the attack surface is like only from the outside world and not inside the organization, it's a lot of policies becomes best practices for good coding. But if the attack surface is inside your threat, they become very important. Do you agree with this statement?
Sorry, it's hard to participate and take notes. That's why I always ask for someone to help take notes.
It's true.
Yeah, and I think once we start to think about the document and then the implementation, I think we can definitely make it a task to go around and see what threats or risks could be realized here. What's the attack surface, for example, to try to provide that additional information outside of for people that are using the guide to understand, do I want to turn this on or not? What's the worst that could happen?
Yeah, I know, like there were some things that are also a matter of opinion. For example, one of the settings was related to require linear history. And when you went out and searched out there, some people were for against it, had a bunch of reasons why it's good, and then some people had a bunch of reasons why it was bad. But at the end of the day, it was a toss of the coin, but it wasn't really clear at that time which one should I choose.
Yeah, and that probably depends on the implementer's perspective, kind of what risks do they care about.
Mhm.
A bank is going to have a different risk appetite and tolerance than a startup, for example.
Yeah.
Any additional things to talk about today? So I have that Noam is going to combine all the data into one MD file for us so that we can start to think about how we're going to organize and tag it. Dan will assist once that's done. We'll be moving the meeting time next time. And then Noam said he'll build a table of the policies for us so we can kind of start to talk more specifically about organization. Any other items I missed?
I believe I said that if I can get like a cleaner or sanitized or some version of what I had put together, that I could share that as well.
Cool. All right, anything else? All right, thank you very much, folks. I appreciate your time. Excited to see a little progress here. We will be talking more in the future. Enjoy the rest of your weeks.
Thank you. Bye.
Cheers.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.